Chapter 5. Ricardo Succeeds. That's when Delilah had that look in her eyes when she wanted to end Deborah's existence. Delilah said, "Now listen here, you." That's when Delilah saw Maya and Keenan fighting. That's when Charles breathed his last and Diana wept. That means she cried. Delilah said, "Deborah, I know where Maya is." Deborah looks at the screen and is in awe of the discovery. Delilah said, "Let's get her." "Diana, let's go. He's dead, and so are we if we let Maya win." Keenan said, "I think I'll get the upper hand and destroy you, Maya, and Ricardo as well for his treachery." Maya said, "You wished." Keenan said, "Shooting star, I wish this ignorant girl would die already." Maya said, "Over my dead body." Keenan said, "In that Ragetti wearing your rival and Nicole's pretty pink princess panties?" Maya said, "Don't you ever bring my rival's name up. You ought to know that." Keenan said, "And you should know better to be wearing pretty pink princess panties too." Maya said, "What?" That is when Keenan blasted Maya with a Ragetti blast, but she dodged it. Keenan said, "How did you do that?" Maya said, "Simple. I'm trained by the best." That's when Keenan started to laugh at Maya. Keenan said, "You foolish little girl. I'll make sure that you fail your mission for Ricardo." That's when Maya disappeared and appeared behind Keenan and didn't see what was coming next. Keenan said, "I have you in my sights," but that's when Maya blocked his move and threw him in the mirror. She disappeared and reappeared behind Keenan and stabbed him in the back with her dagger. Keenan said, "Maya, what have you done?" Maya said, "Shh, don't struggle. It will only make it worse." Maya pulled the dagger from Keenan's back, and that's when Keenan fell on the ground and breathed his last. That's when Delilah sensed that something happened to Keenan. Delilah said, "Oh no, it can't be. Master Keenan, she'll pay for this." Maya said, "Too bad you couldn't do your job. You only had one." Ricardo said, "At least we can see if Wilfred and his gang will do their job for once." Maya said, "I hope he does too for your sake." Ricardo said, "He better. I have a feeling that if he doesn't, I'll have to destroy him as well." Delilah said, "So that's their little game." Diana said, "You want me to summon the soldiers to attack?" Delilah said, "Yes. Let's take out Maya first, then Muku." But little did they know, but Muku had Maya plant some homing bugs to listen to their conversation. Muku said, "I would love to see them try." Ricardo, changing plans. Maya needs to get out of there now. Ricardo said, "Maya, come back to the fighter jet, and we'll figure out what to do with Keenan's airship." Maya said, "Already did it. I planted a bomb on Keenan's airship on self-destruct for..." "What? 15 minutes?" Ricardo said, "What in the world were you thinking?" Maya said, "Well, I had it planted for 30 minutes, and half of that was fighting those soldiers in him." Ricardo said, "Get out of there, and don't let them catch you." Maya said, "You don't have to tell me twice." Ricardo said, "Don't stop for anything." Maya said, "Anything? Really? Like I would do that." Muku said, "How far is Maya?" Ricardo said, "Maya, how far are you from Muku?" Maya said, "I don't know. I don't have a clue until I get there." Muku said, "You better hurry because you got company." Delilah said, "Traitor! You have the nerve to attack Keenan's soldiers and live." Diana said, "Ooh, you killed my Charles." Delilah said, "What are you talking about?" Muku said, "Good job, preschooler." Delilah said, "Who the hell is that?" That's when Diana tuned in to Muku's frequency. Diana said, "Muku, is this you?" Delilah said, "You can say bye to this preschooler." Muku said, "Why do I care?" Ricardo said, "You should care if you let her die in the hands of Delilah and her gang." Muku said, "At least they can play patty cake with her cheeks." Delilah said, "Oh, for crying out loud, attack her!" That's when Keenan's soldiers started to attack Maya in the hall. Maya said, "Great, all this because I killed their leader?" Diana said, "And a bunch of soldiers too, you murderer." Maya said, "Oh, poor baby, I killed your little friends." Diana said, "Oh, you're so proud that you killed my love interest." Maya said, "What are you talking about?" Delilah said, "You did what? I knew it." Maya said, "Oh, big deal. Did he even care about you?" Delilah said, "He cared more than Ricardo, you ignoramus." Maya said, "You think you have a chance against me? You're dead wrong." So Maya decided to fight off all of Keenan's soldiers one by one, but then Maya got thrown into the wall. Maya said, "What in the world?" That is when Maya looked up, and it was Delilah. Delilah said, "So, you work for that traitor, Ricardo." Maya said, "You better back off, fool." Diana said, "You're the fool if you and Ricardo think we're pawns in your little game." Maya said, "You'll be sorry after I'm done with you." Deborah said, "Do you want me to rough her up?" Maya said, "Deborah, that's not what you said when you kissed me in Diamond." Diana said, "You had a menage with her?" Deborah said, "It's not what it seems." Diana said, "Wow, yikes." Muku said, "Oh, shish kebab, I'm coming, Maya." Diana said, "So, Maya, you're into girls? Why don't you have that with me then?" That's when a bunch of soldiers saw Muku. Alan said, "Stop! Intruder!" That is when Maya and Delilah started to duke it out. Maya said, "Yikes, you're not my type." Delilah said, "What is your type? The Rajetti kind?" Maya said, "That is not true." So Maya and Delilah fought it out some more. That is when Muku and Alan started to fight alongside another soldier named Dick. Seriously, story writer? That's very insulting. Anyways, Muku, Alan, and Dick were fighting each other, and Alan tried to take Muku's head off with his saber. Muku said, "Nice try, fool, but you'll have to do better than that to kill me." That's when Alan went for Muku again, but sliced into Dick instead. Alan said, "Oh no, Dick!" That's when Muku slashed into Alan and killed him on sight. Muku said, "Ooh, too easy." But then Delilah, with Deborah's help, kicked Maya into a wall, knocking her out. Maya said, "Impossible." That's when Maya passed out. But then Muku appeared and saw Delilah and Deborah standing there. Delilah said, "Who is this?" Muku said, "Well, you'll find out in a moment." Deborah said, "Soldiers, attack!" So Muku decided to subdue Keenan's soldiers one by one. Deborah said, "Delilah, it's Muku, and he is raging mad." Delilah said, "You better chill out, fool." That's when Muku sees Maya on the ground. Muku said, "What have you done to Maya?" Deborah said, "Inquiring minds want to know." That's when Delilah decided to sneak up on him by teleporting and attacking him when his back was turned. Muku said, "Oh no you don't," but Muku subdued Delilah by throwing her on a soldier. Diana said, "It's been a good run, but it's time for me to go." Then Deborah started to attack Muku, but she got thrown into 3 other soldiers in the area. Muku said, "Where do you think you're going?" David said, "I have a wife and 4 kids. I didn't sign up for this." Muku said, "Fresh meat." Diana said, "Excuse me?" Muku said, "You heard what I said." Diana said, "You're mine, scumbag." Muku said, "Take your best shot." That's when Diana went after Muku. He used his powers on Diana to keep her in the air. Muku said, "What in the world are you wearing under those pants?" Diana said, "They're pretty pink princess panties. What's it to you, you perv?" Muku said, "Is that all you got is a big mouth?" That's when Muku took Diana and threw her into a soldier waiting for the signal, but was too late. Muku said, "Now you want to say something?" Delilah said, "How about you kiss my..." That's when Muku interrupted her mid-sentence. "You want to finish that?" Diana said, "Oh no, my pants." That's when Delilah looked at Diana and why she was wearing those ridiculous panties. Delilah said, "How many times I told you to throw those childish panties away?" Diana said, "But they're my pretty pink princess panties." Muku said, "Enough!" That's when Muku threw Delilah into Diana. Delilah said, "Look out!" Diana said, "Oh no!" That's when Delilah landed on Diana and they passed out. So then Muku took out the rest of the soldiers with a minute left on the clock. Muku said, "Come on, Maya. You can thank me later once you wake up from your coma." Maya said, "Muku?" Delilah said, "What is that on the wall?" Diana said, "That is a bomb on self-destruct, and we only have 45 seconds before it blows." Delilah said, "Then we need to get on a escape pod and get the hell out of here." So Delilah, Diana, and Deborah got into the escape pods and headed out of Keenan's airship before it totally blew up. Delilah said, "Deborah, did you, me, and Diana make it out alive before that bomb exploded?" Deborah said, "Mission accomplished." Diana said, "We made it." Muku said, "Enjoy it while it lasts, because you're going to meet your fate yet." Maya said, "Muku, where am I?" Muku said, "Hi there, sweetheart. Did little Maya have a little boo-boo?" Maya said, "You better be nice, as I was the one who destroyed his ship. Get the picture?" Ricardo said, "Is she in the fighter jet?" Luku said, "Mission accomplished." Maya said, "This guy can kiss me on my boo-boo." Ricardo said, "Maya, chill. Luku, stop messing with her when we have problems of our own." Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, during the night with Sasquatch, Rico, Eve, Argo, and Gorge, they got a transmission from Shaman. Rico said, "I got this. Hey, Shaman, how's it going?" Master Shaman said, "Have you watched the news?" Argo said, "Is that Shaman?" Sasquatch said, "Yeah, I got a notification from Eve that a warship was destroyed." Argo said, "That's because I notified her on the situation while me and her went for a nighttime walk. You said she couldn't sleep, and besides, I didn't want her to have another crazy vision dream." Argo said, "It wasn't crazy." Gorge said, "What? But how?" That's when Gorge paused for a moment and realized it. Gorge said, "Argo, didn't you have that dream about Maya being on Keenan's airship?" Argo said, "Yeah, what about it?" Gorge said, "Ricardo. He had something to do with it." Argo said, "It could be a coincidence." Rico said, "But whose warship was it?" Argo said, "It was Keenan's, you airhead." Master Shaman said, "Young lady, you apologize to Rico right now." That's when Argo cried. Eve said, "Shaman, you know this young lady has been through a lot." Rico said, "Hold on, it's the news." Abigail said, "This is Abigail White with Rajetti News, Channel 5, as a warship landed on Rajetti and landed on top of an apartment building, destroying it with the casualties being in the hundreds." Argo said, "Really? Those poor people didn't deserve that." Eve said, "This is awful." Sasquatch said, "Wait, isn't that the Winku Rajetti apartments? Those poor people." Argo said, "Wait, isn't that named for your late Rajetti master? That's awful." Rico said, "He is going to pay for this, Ricardo." Gorge said, "We got to get back to you with your Rajetti jet." Master Shaman said, "You got my Rajetti jet? But where's Twinkle? Did he escape?" Argo said, "Unfortunately he did, Master Shaman." Rico said, "Looking like he joined Ricardo's ranks. I wouldn't be surprised." Sasquatch said, "Sorry, Shaman. Rico is being sarcastic." Master Shaman said, "Yeah, what else is new?" Rico said, "Sorry, buddy. It's that you've been so worried that we decided to go help Sasquatch find Twinkle, but he found him before we got to this planet." Argo said, "We promised to bring him back in one piece." Eve said, "I promise you that me, Gorge, and Rico will return your Rajetti jet." Master Shaman said, "I trust you on that one, Eve." Rico said, "What about me? We have the voice command device so we can all call for it." Gorge said, "Shaman, I apologize for Rico. He's been worried about you." Master Shaman said, "And you weren't?" Argo said, "Really?" Gorge said, "It's not like that, buddy." Eve said, "Ooh, you're in the doghouse with Shaman when you get back." Master Shaman said, "I'll talk to you all in the morning." Argo said, "Shaman, I will make sure to help Sasquatch get Twinkle back before Wilfred gets to him." Master Shaman said, "What do you mean by that?" Rico said, "There's a bounty on Twinkle's head, and if Argo and Sasquatch don't get him back soon, he'll be Ricardo's to claim." Master Shaman said, "This is bad news. I'll see Eve, Rico, and Gorge when you get back in the morning." Rico said, "Will do, buddy." Master Shaman said, "And Sasquatch, good luck on you getting you and Twinkle off the planet you're on." Sasquatch said, "Twinkle said it was Terran, but I have to be for certain." But that's when Shaman hung up on Sasquatch. Argo said, "You ought to know by now. Twinkle gave you signs telling you." Rico said, "I guess it's time for us to go to sleep. See you in the morning." Argo said, "What did I do?" You said, "Nothing." Rico doesn't like it when someone has to have the last word. Sasquatch said, "Okay, I'll see you guys in the morning." Rico said, "Who are you calling a guy? Even Argo is a couple of ladies." Argo said, "Oh, Rico." Eve said, "Good night, Rico. Don't sweat it, Sasquatch. Good night." So Sasquatch and the others went to sleep. Back on Ricardo's airship, Maya goes to Izzy's cell to check on her when Izzy wakes up. Izzy said, "Who is it?" Maya said, "It's your knight in shining armor." Izzy said, "Oh, knock it off, Maya. I know it was you the whole time wanting to kiss me goodnight." Maya said, will you chill out with the jokes already? Izzy said, it's okay. Your girlfriend is here. Maya said, ooh, you're not my girlfriend, you fool. Izzy said, then maybe I'm your wifey. Maya said, oh, wifey, can you clean the dishes? Izzy said, what in the sexist shish kebab is that? Maya said, oh, that was awesome. Izzy said, not as awesome as Ricardo being next to you while you're messing with me. Maya said, what? Ricardo said, why aren't you asleep? Good night, Rajetti. Maya, you disappoint me. Now go to bed. We have a long day ahead of us. So, in the morning, Gorge, Eve, and Rico wished Sasquatch goodbye. Eve said, goodbye, buddy. Make sure to behave yourself in front of Argo. Rico said, buddy, this is goodbye and good luck. Gorge said, make sure Twinkle returns safely, as Ratchet would hate to hear his brother was DIA. Okay? That's when they got into Shaman's Rajetti jet, while Eve wished Sasquatch a goodbye while heading into Gorge's. Eve said, about time I had this ship all to myself. Gorge said, don't get too comfortable. Rico said, please, Sasquatch, do us a favor and find out what is going on this planet. Gorge said, come on, Rico. Eve said, ooh, this feels good. Gorge said, you know what? Forget you, Eve. Sasquatch said, see you later. Rico said, bye, buddy, and find Twinkle. You hear me? Gorge said, Rico. And like that, they started up Shaman's Rajetti jet and headed off the planet with Eve behind them. Sasquatch said, bye, my friends. Now to find Twinkle. Argo said, I'm coming with you. Sasquatch said, blah, 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 blah. Argo said, what was that? Sasquatch said, nothing. Argo said, totally in the doghouse with that statement. That's when it was taking Sasquatch and Argo a while to walk to town. Argo said, are we there yet? Sasquatch said, no. Argo said, Yagagasti. Sasquatch said, what? Argo said, that is, are we there yet in Spanish? Sasquatch said, Yagagasti in the mine. Argo said, es tu cole la. Sasquatch said, well, you knock it off. Argo said, Benjero. That's when Sasquatch starts to growl at Argo for that. Argo said, what? You asked for it. You think I'm going to keep quiet? I'm not. Sasquatch said, and you want to know why I'm wearing Bonita Rosita Persona Borgadas? Argo said, let me guess. Pretty pink princess panties in Spanish. And yes, I would love to know what possessed you to accept a dare of that magnitude. But then Sasquatch and Argo finally saw a village and couldn't believe their eyes. Sasquatch said, oh, thank you. We finally made it. Isn't that great? Argo said, oh, gracias. Fereme lo lugamos. No es tenguina. Sasquatch said, I give up. Don't do it. Argo said, I was just messing with you. Sasquatch said, that's the last of my worries. Argo said, all we gotta do is find Twinkle and we can head home. Sasquatch said, listen, unless we get rid of Wilfred, we might as well be chased through the galaxy with Twinkle in tow. That is when Sasquatch and Argo finally got to the remote area of the planet Sasquatch landed on, and they headed right into town. Sasquatch looked at the town name, and it was called Renob. Argo said, hey Sasquatch, was this town named after your baby carrot? But that's when everybody started to stare at Sasquatch and Argo as they were passing through town. Sasquatch said, what are they looking at? Haven't they seen a Rajetti warrior before? Rude. Argo said, maybe it's me. Maybe I should put my helmet on before someone tells a bounty hunter I'm here. That's when Sasquatch and Argo saw the barber shop. Argo said, come on, buddy. Let's not make a big problem for the two of us. That's when Sasquatch headed towards the door. Argo said, Sasquatch, don't do it. Oh, my goodness. Sasquatch said, maybe they know where my friend is hiding at. But that's when the barber Hannah's customer looked out the window and yelled, Rajetti, run for the hills. Sasquatch said, oh, come on. Argo said, I apologize for my friend here. He must not realize that some of these people don't take kindly with strangers. Sasquatch said, I'm not a stranger. Hannah said, hey stranger, I don't think you want to be saying that. But that's when everybody saw Wilfred and his gang headed into town. Argo said, what is that cloud of smoke, and why is it getting closer? Sasquatch said, now what is going on? Is that what I think it is? Hannah said, that's Wilfred and his gang of outlaws. Argo said, we are afraid that would happen. Hannah said, what? Do you know them? Sasquatch said, whatever I did this time, I can say I'm innocent. Argo said, unless proven guilty on a planet like Pearin. That's when Wilfred and his gang approached Hannah's place and looked at Sasquatch. Wilfred said, I think you wore out your welcome here, Rajetti. You think after what your Rajetti friend did, you have the nerve to show your face in this village? You have another thing coming. Argo said, hi, my name is El Moranco Morocco. Wilfred said, did you say Aranda Narocco? What is that, Spanish? That's a pretty name. I mean a manly name. Not like this Rajetti. Sasquatch said, listen, dude, I don't want any trouble from you. That's when Manuel looks at Sasquatch. Manuel said, hey, boss, isn't this the Rajetti that messed up Delilah and her gang's plan to steal the gold from the transport? Hager said, say what? You're that Rajetti's friend that basically helped him take out Stryker on Toxica before that planet blew up. Hannah said, that Rajetti? I didn't know you were friends with Ratchet. Argo said, yeah, Ratchet was a riot. Wilfred said, wow, there's going to be trouble for the both of you if you don't leave, you Rajetti scumbag. Hannah said, back off them. Hager said, all right, you'll braid his hair? Emilio said, that was a good one, Hager. Argo said, Wilfred, is it? You said the word dingleberry was pretty? Dude, your head is not all there, I swear. Sasquatch said, wait a second. That was way too far. Who do you work for? I don't know. Ricardo? Wilfred said, that's none of your business. Hannah said, well, it should be his business. That's when Hagar grabs her and Argo started to panic. Argo said, leave her alone. Wilfred said, bad voice. Hannah said, let go of me, you creep. Hagar said, but you're too pretty to let go of. Argo said, stop it, or I'll blast you. Wilfred said, beat it, Rajetti. It's none of your concern. Argo said, it should be if you're attacking innocent people. Hannah said, save yourself, Rajetti. Argo said, help me out here, Sasquatch. Hagar said, how do you know his name? Argo said, I didn't say what I said. Ayudame, Aqua, Sasquatch. Wilfred said, the Rajetti girl. Sasquatch said, well, it should be after what you said to me. I'm a Rajetti warrior from the planet of Rajetti, and I should be able to know where my friend Twinkle is. Hagar said, yeah, and I'm the head of Rajetti. Argo said, more like the head of Docha. That means the head of douche. That's when the deputy arrives from the jailhouse. Argo said, who is that? Hagar said, wow. Wilfred said, it was nice meeting you, Rajettis, but we do have a bounty to collect. Sasquatch said, what in the world? Argo said, I'll stop them. But that's when the deputy, whose name was Andrew, no, serious, that's his name. It's really that awful. Anyways, the deputy saw Wilfred and his crew race off on their Rajetti cycles. Andrew said, hey, you come back here, Wilfred. Hey, freeze, Rajetti. Hannah said, leave him alone, deputy. He ain't hurting no one. That's when Argo saw Sasquatch was in trouble. Argo said, oh no, Sasquatch. But she knew she had to chase them down to know where their hideout was. Sasquatch said, I just wanted to know where my friend was. I'm innocent of all wrongdoing. Andrew said, you need to get out of here, Rajetti. We don't want your kind here. Hannah said, what did you say, deputy? I thought Nick said it loud and clear. There is no ignorance towards outsiders. Sasquatch said, wait a minute. Why aren't the Rajetti warriors allowed here? Dude, I want some answers. Andrew said, yeah, likely story there, bud. You, a Rajetti warrior? That's a laugh riot. Hannah said, wait until your boss hears about this. Andrew said, try me. I'll have your job as fast as the sheriff gave you one. Sasquatch said, are you serious, dude? Can I speak with the sheriff? Hannah said, I would leave town if I were you. Andrew said, he isn't here right now, and you're not going to be either. Hannah said, that is a lie and you know it. Andrew said, Okay, Rajetti, so I'm going to escort you back to your Rajetti jet, and I don't want to see you on this planet again. Sasquatch said, but my reserves are low on my Rajetti jet, and it needs to be filled up. Andrew said, not my problem. Sasquatch said, I just wanted to know where my friend Twinkle was, and I'll be on my way. Andrew said, not so fast, bud. I'm going to escort you to your Rajetti ship, and that's final. Sasquatch said, fine, but can I get a drink first? I'm so thirsty. That's when Argo spotted their hideout. Argo said, bingo, I got you now, you dirty varmints. Now to get out of here. Wilfred said, not so fast, my pretty rose. That's when Twinkle blasted at Wilfred's sniper rifle as soon as Wilfred was going for the shot on Argo, and Wilfred spotted them. Wilfred said, who's there? Show yourself. Crew, we need to go back into town and hunt us a spy. Back at the village square in Pearin, Hannah decided to give Sasquatch a drink of water from her thermos. Hannah said, here. Andrew said, don't you be giving him anything. He doesn't deserve any water from anyone. Got it? Sasquatch said, I just walked through sandstorms and blazing sun to get here. At least let the lady give me a drink. Andrew said, no can do, Rajetti. Hannah said, he might be telling the truth. Andrew said, how do you know that unless you got a crush on him, barber? Okay, it's time for me to escort you now. Let's go. Sasquatch said, hey, look, a dingleberry. Andrew said, where? I don't see one. So that is when Sasquatch got on his hands and feet and ran for the hills. Hannah said, run, Sasquatch! Get out of here! Andrew said, you come back here, Rajetti. That's an order. Round up my Rajetti cycle so I can catch him. That's when Argo saw that Sasquatch was running and had to land. Argo said, what is going on, Hannah? Why is Sasquatch running? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to take his helmet off. Hannah said, you're a girl. Argo said, and you're a pretty lady. What else is new? Hannah said, all right, wise ass. Andrew has been arguing with your Rajetti friend, and the deputy won't let him get a drink of water. Argo said, some deputy you are. Andrew said, hey, that's a soldier's armor. I'm coming back for you. So Sasquatch ran for dear life while the deputy awaited his Rajetti cycle. Hannah said, how much time are you going to waste until you open your eyes and realize we can all live in harmony? Andrew said, what was that, barber? Was that your job going to the customer of yours? Argo said, that's a horrible thing to say. Hannah said, he couldn't cut hair if his life depended on it. Nick said, hey, Rajetti girl, you with the soldier's armor. Argo said, I can explain. Nick said, I know who you are. You're Argo. So they started up the Rajetti cycle for the deputy. Andrew said, about time you got it started for once. Hannah said, no thanks for them helping you, you ignoramus. And like that, Andrew the deputy jumped on his Rajetti cycle. Andrew said, hand me my lasso. I'm going to catch me a Rajetti. So Andrew grabbed for his lasso and went after Sasquatch and chased him through the whole area of the village. Nick said, oh, this is going to be good. Argo said, is he like this? Hannah said, believe me, baby girl, this is him and a few fries short of a meal. Argo said, I believe you on that one. Sasquatch said, holy cow, where did that deputy come from? Andrew said, you won't get far from me, Rajetti. Sasquatch said, what are you going to do about it? Bore me to death? Wilfred said, glad that Rajetti's distracted that annoying deputy. He is such a pain in the butt. Wait, there is our spy. Meanwhile, back at the barber's, Twinkle said, so that deputy is such a pain in the butt as much as Wilfred when he tried to shoot you down. That was when Hannah and Argo looked at Twinkle with that look on their face. End of chapter. If you enjoy this, do yourself a favor and click the like button. Please subscribe to this channel, as Rajetti Warriors is here to say. Please click the notification bell for new content coming to this channel. And as always, until chapter 6, Sasquatch vs. Andrew, the deputy of Pearin. And as always, peace.